Yes, thank you very much for the warm introduction. I feel very much at home here in this interdisciplinary context, but unfortunately, in the hospital where I come from, it doesn't look that interdisciplinary. So that's also why I'm here to advertise for more interdisciplinary work within the health context, especially within the surgical context where I'm coming from. Before we dive into the discussion, I just wanted to briefly flag some issues that we might discuss later on. Two topics that I find particularly interesting in that interdisciplinary context here. And this is the future of image display, of image presentation, of the way we look at images, especially in surgical practice. This is one topic, and the other topic is image analysis and image interpretation. So how humans and computers understand and make sense of images. If we look at what current machine learning algorithms can do in real time, this is the YOLO script, for example, we get an idea of how computers could support human decision making in the field of object detection and image recognition. And if you consider that the current success of artificial intelligence is still mainly like beating chess players and beating Go players and so on, you might wonder why there's so much investment of big tech companies in the medical domain. Of course, because one big field with this second digital transformation of Industry 4.0 is to make sense of medical data. So there are a huge amount of unstructured medical data that nobody's making sense of right now. So if we look at just a typical imaging procedure in surgical practice, it's very often that what you see on the left side here, radiologists and surgeons scroll through stacks of CT images. To make sense of that images, you need to build up a cognitive 3D model of the anatomy here in order to find connections between each imaging stack. And this is, well, currently mostly made by human resources, by heuristic approaches. So what we do is try to find a tumor, try to find abnormalities in that patient data. And this is something that companies such as Google DeepMind's Health, amongst many others, are trying to provide as an automated service. But of course, this is not the only field. So the reason why we see so much venture capital, especially from outside the classical medical domain in medical imaging or imaging procedures, is that the companies try to make sense of what we could maybe call the health graph. But this goes way beyond just structuring the data that we have in the hospital, as shown in this paper by Google AI. Those companies also know what we drink, where we travel, how fit we are, what kind of sports we do. So I think there's much more behind that than providing software solutions. I think we will see a huge transformation and the start that companies from traditionally outside the medical domain will start to become healthcare providers. We can already see that in daily practice, so we can sit in front of a computer and we can buy surgical decisions as a cloud service. This is, for example, an offer by Arteris. So we sit in front of the monitor, we upload a stack of CT images, and we get a prediction about how probable a certain diagnostic is. So we get maybe a probability, and of course this affects decision making. And there's a lot of anxiety amongst medical employees about how their practice will change, how even their profession is threatened. And one huge problem is this AI black box problem. So we upload something and then we get a prediction. So this is totally not a heuristic approach. Normally this is based, as we have seen, on experience, on self-learning, on evidence, on facts. And here we have learning algorithms that the practitioner themselves do no longer understand. They're provided with a prediction, a probability that, of course, in imaging they can trace, they can go back and maybe understand that, but of course it deeply affects their decision making. And currently, this in the medical industry leads to what I call the AI versus MD doctrine. So on the one hand, we have people such as Geoffrey Hinton, kind of the guru of deep learning, now working for Google AI, says like medical schools should stop training radiologists right now. This is of course a provocation, and we think that AI should be employed more as a tool to improve results and to help us understand certain diseases. But of course, this is a kind of a huge gap between human intelligence and computer intelligence that currently creates a lot of anxiety. Where we are heading to, what are we doing with our data, how will this affect decision making? Imaging as it is can be standardized easily is just one example, but if we dig into like computer-assisted surgery, robot-assisted surgery, there's a lot of potential for automated decision making and robotic assistance. So the second topic that I want to flag before we start our discussion is the question of image display, of image presentation. In the operating room, surgeons and the whole surgical teams need to make fast decisions, and they need efficient information. We have a lot of data on many screens in the OR that we need to understand and that we need to make sense of in a very short time. And this, of course, is like vital data, but this is also a lot of spatially related data. For example, CT images that are flat, that are sectional images cut out of the patient by a machine. This is, for example, video-based informations in robotic or laparoscopic surgery, as you can, for example, see here. So here you need a lot of hand-eye coordination to be able to, just on the basis of that video, coordinate your instruments here. So this kind of spatially related data is still made sense of purely cognitively. So you need to relate the position of the monitor, the position of the two-dimensional video, to a three-dimensional patient in front of you. And this is, of course, something that is quite complex and difficult to do and can lead to mistake. So what we think might be a very promising future approach is to merge this spatially related data and to bring it closer to the operating field. Not only bringing it closer, as you can, for example, see here on the left, but also, and this is a very experimental approach, even merge it with the operating side. This is technically very complex and also has practically a lot of issues, but moving two-dimensional data to three-dimensional simulation helps you to refer from medical data, to conclude from medical data to your actual problem, to the operating side. You can see this, for example, here in the studies by Phillips on the left, where the three-dimensional simulation helps the surgeons to navigate instruments inside the body. Or you can see it on the left by colleagues from a French working group who actually try to overlay the operating field with depth information, something that you normally see on a two-dimensional CT images. And from there you have to conclude, for example, to the position of a tumor. This is something we investigated in Charité as well, and we will hear more about this also from BrainLab in a minute. But what we ask ourselves, how efficient can that be, and in what situations can we use that new technology? But as you already see, it's still in a very experimental stage. So we don't have the technical abilities, and it's kind of difficult to do. So what we try to figure out is when can we actually use it? When can us help this technology? And of course, one big issue that we are facing, that we investigated within interdisciplinary teams of game designers and interaction designers, is how do those visualizations have to look like? Because if you render a death structure, like think of X-ray vision maybe, if you render a death structure on a surface, you see the surface and what lies behind inside the anatomy at the same time. And this is difficult to make sense because always those images occlude something because the surface, of course, is opaque. So this is just the design studies, but what I like to show with this is that we need interdisciplinary expertise. We need mixed reality developers, we need game designers, we need interaction designers to solve those problems, and currently we don't have that in the clinic. So there's a lot of need of interdisciplinary knowledge transfer, and that's also my mission here a little bit, to attract people from different fields to think about, oh hey, yeah, I do have that problem maybe in my in entertainment, and well, there are a lot of other people in the industry who maybe have the same problems and have a huge knowledge deficit. And to conclude, of course, there are many other applications, and we will discuss this in more depth now, for, I call them reality technologies, for XR in surgery. We use them for teaching, for example, for understanding anatomy in VR or in mixed reality, because you can relate your body to certain structures. We use them for virtual hospitation, and we have, for example, made volumetric recordings. This is also a topic which is big at this conference. Of course, in planning and diagnostics, it's very interesting to build 3D models out of our traditional 2D sections. This is something that is hugely coming right now. Then, of course, for telemedicine and remote assistance, it can be very useful for virtual consultations, but also because you can always relate this technology, especially mixed reality, to a spatial environment, to the patient directly. There are a lot of new opportunities than just having remote assistance by voice, for example. And finally, the interoperative visualization, which is kind of the most complex field, in my opinion, but there's also one of the biggest potentials. Yeah, and that's just a brief intro in some of the topics that we may discuss now, and that's it from my side. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Moritz, for that introduction. May I already ask you to one of the two seats in the middle, and also ask Kathleen and Christoffer up on stage. And Kathleen, I'd leave it open to you to then introduce Christoffer to the audience.
Yeah, thank you. So
I hope nobody fainted with the pictures we just saw. You all look all right.
Just after breakfast, right? Yeah, so Christoffer Hamilton is joining us. He's the director of the Brain Lab, which he is working already more than a decade there. And his background, as you said, interdisciplinarity here, the background is also not in the medical field. He is a computer scientist, and he is working for a medical device industry over 15 years already. And the company develops, manufactures, and distributes software-based medical technology, providing access to optimizing more efficient and minimal invasive patient care. Develops in neurosurgery. I'm not sure if people know what radiosurgery is, but maybe we can take that later. And other surgery disciplines can be carried out with Brain Lab technologies. So we want to talk with you too, and with the audience about the topic in general. And thank you for giving us this introduction to how virtual technology and artificial intelligence is used in the surgery rooms. And maybe we can already talk about the interdisciplinarity approach. Like you with your computer science background, how did you get into that field?
Well, actually, I got into the medical field in 2003 at a time period where it was very difficult to find jobs. Actually, in Germany, it was like a crisis, but the medical technology companies, they're not so cyclical, so they were hiring. And I think Moritz is really right about this interdisciplinary approach. We develop mixed reality applications, and it's really completely different from the classical software programs. You need these game designers, you need a completely different approach for developing software that our users, the surgeons, interact with.
And for instance, how are your teams like who is in your team? What kind of background do they have?
So we develop mostly softwares. We have
Yeah.
mostly software developers, then we have project managers and project engineers. But within Brain Lab we have large teams, we have usability engineers, and what a very good resource is having real surgeons working for the company, so that there's someone walking in the hallway that you can grab and say, look, what about this problem? Is this something that actually happens in the operating room?
So surgeons are employees of your company.
Yes, yes.
And they are helping you to develop the software for other surgeons who are working in the field.
Yes, exactly.
Got it. And when it comes to learning and training, as Moritz showed us, is that also are you also developing software for learning and training?
So we're more developing for maybe image review or actually treatments. So I think there are two parts. You can see a lot of these applications, you can ask, are they for a specific patient, like a certain patient, and do I vary the application by patient? Or is it a general teaching? Because if you want to teach students or residents about a medical condition, you don't need patient-specific imaging. So that's kind of, we do more patient-specific. I don't know if Moritz is more into general teaching and general patients, but
You can answer that if you want to.
I mean, we are investigating the big picture. So we in the lab, we don't develop technology ourselves. So this is not a capacity we have. So we are a practice-based. We are a university hospital. But of course, we are interested in technological development, but we try to kind of kick off it to connect industry, research, and practice with each other. So we try to propose also, especially for this kind of experimental approaches, experimental technologies that is not a standard yet, we try to find use cases. We try also, if there are good products out there, to interest our surgeons in that, because they don't have much time, but they are still interested in new technologies. So we present and evaluate those new technologies, but we translate them, if you will, into both directions, into practice, and also the demands from practice towards the industry. So we are kind of translators and communicators in that sense.
And as you also showed the importance of artificial intelligence and opening the black box, Christoffer, your algorithms, when you're developing the software, is artificial intelligence one of the big topics that you're also addressing or that you are integrating?
yes, this is definitely a hot topic in the industry, and I really liked Moritz's presentation, how he showed this black box. And it's a huge topic. How do I display this information to the surgeons? And I think you touched a bit on this, that if you give the surgeon a number and you say, look, this procedure is 95% success rate and this other is 75, then that's very not so transparent for the surgeon. What does this mean? So that's a huge challenge in how to make this information that maybe we as in our products develop through artificial intelligence to make them visible to the surgeon, that they understand the background of the data.
But that means opening the black box, so you're working with neural networks where you're trying to understand why the algorithm made that assumption at its 95% versus 75%, right?
Yeah, I guess that's very challenging with artificial intelligence, because it's often a black box result that's coming out. Maybe you have to combine algorithms, or maybe you have to create complex visualizations, maybe even add mixed reality for kind of three-dimensional visualizations to present results. And maybe to make this a bit more tangible for the audience, you could think of it like if you have an imaging of the brain, like Moritz showed, and you want to tell the surgeon, look, here's a tumor, which part of the tumor should you take out of the body? And you might want to keep a certain part of the tumor to avoid damaging things like eyesight. So it's a continuum. It's not black and white when you remove a brain tumor. So you might want to color that in, like the parts of the brain where it's safe to remove the tumor and where it starts getting dangerous.
I mean, I saw that last weekend with a surgeon on another festival, the surgeon from Mount Sinai, who is training his brain surgeries, he is training it and mapping 3D models with virtual reality glasses and seeing like how much he can cut off this tumor. Is that also something where you are directly helping, or was it just to explain to the audience? Can you really directly help the surgeons?
Yeah, that's definitely something. And where we help and where mixed reality helps through the three-dimensional impression. So that's very important for us. With the glasses, we can create a very good 3D image, and it helps to give a very good spatial relationship between the patient and the imaging.
How do you do that from a regulatory perspective? I mean, if let's say I'm a pharmaceutical company and I want to launch a new medication, it takes years until it's tested and until it's permitted to the market by FDA and other authorities. I mean, we're talking about experimental surgery and stuff like that with new technology. So I don't know how directly you have to get involved with patients to try out that stuff. And what does it take to really be able to do that? Or can you do, I don't know, part of it in the lab and do the rest later? What do you have to do to authorize that technology with all the regulatory bodies to being able to use it in real-time scenarios?
So we follow basically the same procedures as the pharmaceutical companies. They're a bit different for medical devices, so they don't take quite as long, but we also require FDA approval. So I live in a more constrained world, I think, than Moritz, and we have to, of course, do clinical trials, do clinical investigations. So there are lots of time-consuming parts and things to do before you can release a product to the market.
So isn't the technology already outdated then by the time it's given to the market, or?
Well, that's often the case because you have like 5 to 10 years to kind of get products approved. But the development cycles are longer than in the non-medical industries or in other industries. So you need a long breath. You need also a lot of money. You need more than just a good idea to be successful. But maybe just to I can tell a small story from what we experienced. So we have a lot of startups in the AI sector asking us for our expertise, and on the one hand, there is a small company which has a good idea, and they would like to train their algorithm. So they have a machine learning algorithm in the imaging sector, and they ask for our data because, of course, the hospital has huge amounts of data that they themselves make not really sense of. So, I mean, if you have an experienced surgeon, he's overlooking a lot of cases. If you have 30 years experience, you're overlooking a lot of cases, and you can compare a lot. But this is not comparable to a machine learning algorithm who can compare thousands of different cases in near to real time, of course. But for that, we have to build up trust, and this is also something that that we have to do because in the public discourse, AI is still very much an antagonism between human and machine intelligence. So we still have this vision of the human-like robot sitting there doing something that we usually do. And I think we need to think of it more of an assistive function, something that adds to our decision-making. So we definitely need to train radiologists in the future, but their competency and their knowledge and their practice will definitely change. So they have to adapt to those new technologies. But what will be very hard to do is to make them understand the predictions. So it's not easy to build up trust in this sector because it's not that you can trace back a certain decision. You don't understand a certain probability. You have to take it into account. But in order to do that, you still, of course, need the old school. So I think it will not disappear. But of course, it can help a lot, especially in avoiding mistakes or in like assisting, for example, what kind of damage you could produce or can avoid to produce.
I mean, what we're talking about here is a wide field of topics, and thinking of Charité, it is a huge operating hospital. especially Department of Surgery. And I mean, we all know hospitals. Nobody has time. Everything has to go quickly. How do you create the space, the time, and everything for that kind of creativity, thoughts, interaction with companies like BrainLab or whoever else might be interested to work with that data that you have that is unused?
Well, that's a very difficult task. I mean, Charité is the largest university hospital in Europe, so there is a lot of research going on besides like private clinics, for example, and there's a huge interest also in testing and evaluating new technologies, and of course there are a lot of companies building those products are also interested. But I think it's very important to have like those kind of experimental grounds within the hospital infrastructure, because especially a lot of small companies lack the ability to test their ideas in a practical context. And if you are not a medical company with an outstanding history, with a lot of experience, with showrooms and so on, it's very difficult to get into that domain. And this is what we're trying to build up in the clinic as well, to with the Future Lab, to be able to translate between small ideas, between new products, between experimental products and practice. And this is something that is quite complex to do, because we are not yet healing people with that technology. So it's not easy to get funding for this. So you can't imagine it as this shiny as the huge companies have, but we're trying to build up that competence, and I think we need to, because especially the university clinics also, they are lacking this competency. And as you said, it's hard to get those surgeons in between the surgery. Come, I have a question. I have somebody who's proposing something. Can we discuss that? And then they sit there and you need to explain them the AI black box. Of course, that's
I'm coming back to the glass of wine that I mentioned yesterday. You probably, I mean, all good new ideas start over 1 or 2 glasses of wine, and it's probably you just have to drag them out of the operating room in the evening and drag them to a bar and see what happens next.
Well, let's come back to the topic of visualization, because I didn't mention yet that BrainLab is closely working with Magic Leap, and so talking about the experimental use of augmented reality glasses. Don't you have a video for us? Maybe we can skip into that and see what you are already doing with Magic Leap. And then I want to also, because we have to stick to the time, we also want to see if we have questions from the audience, but I want to go back to the topic of volumetric capturing, because you said that, and our next case is about that. So let's see what we can.
Christoffer, do you want to say a few words before we roll the video, or should we?
Yeah, maybe just so. What we're doing here, we actually launched this week. I'm very happy. Yes, and it fitted very nicely with the video. A product that we're bringing out, which is used, so it's regulatory approved in Europe, pending in the United States, and it can be used in the office to prepare for surgery. And we wanted to show a video just for everyone to get a feeling of what we're doing.
Maybe you tell us more about that. What did we just see?
So what you just saw is a product. So surgeons can purchase this, and it integrates with their existing system. And the idea here is that you collaboratively, so multiple people watch together a 3D model of the brain.
And in the product has different models of organs?
So this is patient specific. So you put in the patient data. So if you have like a neurosurgical condition, maybe something with the vessels in the brain, the surgeon can bring up that exact data, that patient's data, and look at it. And I mentioned earlier the 3D, so it's real 3D, that's very important. But another thing that works very well with mixed reality is the collaboration. So multiple people seeing the same model at the same position. And maybe you saw they had these kind of lightsabers. You can actually point to the model and say, look, here's a vessel, don't damage this, or be careful over here. So I think that's the one of the highlights with mixed reality and with the products is actually collaborating together on a model.
Oh, I mean, that gives a next step. Yesterday we had in the morning the visualization of data in VR and AR, but that is definitely a step further, because it looks like then you can really help people and not just show charts of the stock market.
Yeah, especially since imaging in medicine so far was, pretty 2D and especially pretty static also. Thinking about X-rays, MRTs, and everything else. As you explained in the beginning, you just have static layers, and here you start going into 3D models, and that's probably where volumetric comes in as well, where you have additional imaging possibilities. And so what role does volumetric play in that context?
Maybe can I lead to to that volumetric
Sure.
topic, but I'm very interested in the future of XR, how you can apply this technology in real practice. And from my point of view, the success is only there when it only works when those images are situated. So when you relate them to a spatial context. I think this is the best use cases. So far, we haven't seen so much good mixed reality content, and we are very curious. We waited for this a long time. So we are happy to test that in the upcoming weeks. But beyond that, being spatially related to a patient, related to a structure, I think, as Christoffer already said, mixed reality can help a lot in those fields where you need to collaborate and where you have to work hands-free. And this is also something very important in the OR. And this is also a big problem still. The usability to work with your hands has improved a lot, gestures, voice, but it's still not at that level where you can really smoothly interact with it. I'm pretty sure that will change in some time, but this is a big problem still, which we see in practice. That we saw also with HoloLens, and that will be improved also with HoloLens 2, but still all the big companies will need their venture capital here in order to improve usability, especially in those sensitive environments where those glasses can be used very efficiently, I think.
Yeah, if there's no venture capital in the room, it is recorded, so I'm hopefully someone hears that.
And to lead to this volumetric issue, this is something I didn't show. Maybe we can bring it into the other sessions on volumetric capturing here. With virtual reality, we have a lot of new potential for simulation in surgical teaching, in surgical planning. That is also now going to mixed reality. But what we don't have yet is an efficient format to import video into VR. We have a great success of 360-degree video currently, which is very impressive, but for me it's not native VR. It's not the 6 degrees of freedom that you really need to work efficiently in virtual reality. And that's why we think volumetric capturing has a huge potential in teaching and understanding procedures. Skill-based simulation can still be carried out in pure CGI context, but understanding stress, understanding working procedures, understanding the context, for this you need a video format, and VR is very useful for that because of course you can see things in 3D and in real scale, and you can relate your own body to that, and that makes a huge difference also in those mixed reality settings. Being able to relate to something with your, to drag and drop in space and move around something, especially when it's about understanding complex structures, is very, very helpful. And it's huge different to just seeing it on a screen, which might have a better resolution. Also, you can collaborate on a screen as well, but it's a completely different thing.
are you already using biometric, or is that a in the making, like a plan to go for the? 'Cause I remember when we talked earlier, you told me that there is some project.
Yeah, just
coming
very
up.
briefly, we did a pilot study. Technically, it's very complex, especially in the operating room, because you need a lot of sensors and a lot of cameras. But with the new sensing technologies, it's getting smaller and smaller, and you need less infrastructure. But of course, you can imagine that we cannot carry the VoluCap studio behind us into an operating room. That's very complex. So we have a small mobile setup that we built, not with a goal to develop our own setup, but to convince the stakeholders that this is something that we really need to live stream operations, but also there's a lot of money being spent in the medical industries to fly to other hospitals to make hospitations and look at imaging procedures. And this is a huge difference than just seeing them on a GoPro or on a 360-degree live streaming camera. If you are able to move around, to step into the roles of the people in the OR, I think you get a better idea of what they're actually doing. But this is mostly, I think, for procedural knowledge. And there is a huge lack. It's a smaller market than the skill-based simulators, but currently I don't see any really good solutions there on the market.
No, I think there are some coming up. Do we have questions from the audience? Of course, Ralf Schäfer. As I say, there might be something coming up. You might have an idea from Fraunhofer, Heinrich Kurz Institute.
No, I didn't want to talk about that, but it's a pleasure that you have reached the status of a product. But as far as I understood, it's pre-operative. And how far are you away to using this online to have the planning data on the patient during operation or whatever? Is it 10 years ago or 2 years ago? 10 years away or 1 year away or 2 years away?
It's more 1 to 2 years away than anything else. But it's a lot about the regulatory environment. But we're also bringing this to the market, kind of like proving, look, we have a product. Because when we show this to surgeons, many of them say, oh, I had no idea this was so far. So it's also like creating the proof, look, there's something on the market, and it has a value, and then we move on from there into the operating room.
So the brain is more or less static, but how about elastic organs? So I think there's still a big challenge, isn't it?
So when it comes to overlaying, precise overlaying, or surgical navigation, it's always easier with like bone, like brain, spine, everything that's rigid, and if it's movable, like kidney, liver, or anything else, it's more complicated. So that's, I mean, there you really have to look at each and every procedure, maybe also vessel surgery. Where is it valuable and where is it less valuable?
Maybe to explain this a little bit, also for the audience, in the OR, you always have the problem that you have patient data, which is made an hour before, a week before, a month before, and then of course you have this intraoperative data. And being able to merge those two fields is technically very complex because you have to translate them in the same scale, but still you have the time gap that if you, for example, dissect a certain part of anatomy, how do you mirror that in the image? And this is quite complex. This is technically very complex. There's a lot of promising research on that, I think. Especially with soft tissue, it's very complex, but also technically to render that within the current technology in the headsets is also quite complex, I think. So right now, I think we will see that users in the OR will mirror the position. So I think we are not overlaying, especially not in the field where you have flexible structures. In trauma surgery, for example, I can see cases that are less complex, where we can see that in a few years, probably.
We have time for one more last question.
Just
already answered. Then you can ask another question.
No, I just last remark. So I think we are working on this volumetric thing but I think it's still a long way to go to have something usable for you for practice.
Maybe if your question is already answered, let me ask a question.
Has one.
Oh, you have another one? Yeah.
There was
Otherwise,
one
I would
more.
have asked you one.
Just maybe you hear me the medical community seems to be very international. So I have get a little blink in this field on this evening now, and I asked myself, how far are the other countries, let's say, China, USA, are they way further than we are here, or have they all the same problems? Have they solved some problems? Do you have an overview of that?
So I think in general, medical device technology is very much Europe and the United States, a bit Japanese too. I'd say they're all about at the same level. There are maybe different challenges in the countries. The way how we solve problems, like in the United States, there is more staff in the operating room. Labor is cheaper in the United States, and so there are things that are different between the continents, and they kind of also differ in development too.
And then, of course, if you look at those experimental technologies, there are a lot of different regulatory aspects. So if you have entered one market in Germany, it's not easy to just go to Japan or go to the US. And I mean, as a big company, you can do that because you have the expertise in-house. But especially for those technologies that are not yet established and maybe come out of smaller development projects or are kind of interdisciplinary, I think it's quite difficult to enter international markets.
Yeah, I'm already running into overtime. I think the last question we can do, right?
Okay. So Facebook, Apple, and probably others are putting lots of resources into developing smart glasses. And what do you expect from this kind of technology and the devices for the medical field?
I mean, there's a huge potential, as the demo just showed, but we're still in the very beginning. So there's so many technical problems to solve. Not only like imitating human vision and sensing and having an efficient spatial recognition and making the usability better. I think we are not. I mean, I can say that from a non-industry side, I think we are still far away from having that in practice on a large basis. Of course, there are a lot of pilot studies and there are products on the market right now, but I think Magic Leap will definitely need that $2.6 billion venture capital, and they will need much more. But the hype is still ongoing. I thought a year ago, maybe it's over, but apparently it's not over. And in the medical domain, there are a lot of use cases, and the intraoperative use case is maybe the most complex one. But there are many use cases that are easily translatable from other industries where they're already established, especially in teaching, in learning, in logistics, in planning, in procedures that you can easily standardize, that are not in that sensitive environment such as the OR. And the good thing in the medical industry also, the money is there. There's more money than in entertainment, much more money. So, and while the hype is ongoing, I think it's still a very good opportunity to say like, oh, we have that product in e-learning. Maybe why not apply that in the medical field? It's a good moment. You can get funding quite easily because the content out there is still very bad. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, right now.
Yeah, you want to say?
I'd say what we need from them is the visualization and the sensors of the glasses, the sensors that detect the world. I'm more optimistic. I think we've been waiting for this. So we had our first augmented reality product in 2003. We want these glasses because they solve a problem. And we have lots of surgeons coming to us and are excited because they see it solves a problem. And the problem is, I'm in the operating room, the patient is in front of me. There's no mouse, there's no keyboard, there's no ergonomy. And having the images displayed in front of you wherever you want is just such a huge advantage. So that's why we are so eager to use this technology and why we are early. I think we're both very early with using this, if you look on a broad scale.
Yeah. And to just add one sentence, that's always the way I try to explain my students use cases for XR. The operating room is really a perfect use case for that. It has all those, we talked about it, I won't repeat it, but it's the perfect opportunity for XR, but still we need to make it happen. And it's quite difficult. It's more difficult than in other fields, but there's a lot of potential. I would totally agree with you. So I'm also optimistic, but I think it will need some time, and it will need definitely more interdisciplinary cooperation.
So you all see we're only scratching on the surface of
And
this.
just
this
to
topic.
end this, as you said, there is more money here in medical than in entertainment. In America, it's apparently opposite, because like we talked with Mount Sinai, and they saying they have huge problems to fund what they are doing there, and they're showing amazing stuff that they are using in VR, AR, AI, and so forth. So maybe there's a huge difference between the markets. And to finish that, Ralf Schäfer has some more comments, but I'm pretty sure you can talk with them afterwards, because we have to give the audience the time to run to the other stage if they want to. So please give a warm applause to Christoffer and Moritz.